everyone. Sorry I'm not in today, but I did prepare this lecture for you in advance. So today we're going to talk about CLUESS, which is an acronym for things you can do to make your writing a lot smoother. Okay, so CLUESS is basically clues to smoother writing. Okay, I hope you didn't hear my dog barking in the background. Okay, so the C in CLUE stands for coherence. Then we have language, unity, emphasis, support, and sentences. So we're going to go over each of these. So the first one is coherence. Coherence is a connection between ideas or the relationship of ideas connecting smoothly from one to the next. So sometimes it's from sentence to sentence or paragraph to paragraph, but it just means that things are connecting in a way that makes sense. So you might have asked yourself before, does my essay make sense? Is it smooth? Is it flowing? Right? How would you know? So for coherence, you can look at these things to see if you have you have coherence going on in your essay. So you can look to see if you have a pattern, if you're using transitional phrases, and there is a handout I have on Moodle that I've already made available to everyone. Right? So you can use that handout for some suggestions on different transitional phrases. You're going to use repetition, pronouns, and you're going to maintain a consistent point of view. So the first thing with coherence is you want to check to see if you have a pattern in your writing. So in your narrative essay, time was your pattern, right? You started with this first event, then this happened, then soon that happened, then following week later this happened. If you are describing something, right, your pattern might be space, like where things are located, right? Maybe you start like up here there's this thing, then below it here, then right next to it there's this. And for this informative essay, right, you're probably either going to use time or emphasis. So if you're giving examples, you're doing illustration, right, you will have emphasis. So you'll say first this example, then second there's this one. And if you're doing process analysis, then you're going to use time, right? First this step, then second step. Coherence is also about connection. So a lot of the connections can be made using transitional devices. They really function to move your idea, to help your reader understand, right, your ideas from one to the next. So here's a passage here. So first I realized I had to get a job to stay in school. At the same time, my rugby coach wanted the team to spend more hours practicing drills. We were, after all, the defending champs. In the end, I had no choice but to let my coach know that I would have to sit out on some games so that I could look for a job and do well on my midterm exams. So here where I've underlined are all the transitional phrases. So what happens when we remove them? I realized I had to get a job to stay in school. My rugby coach wanted the team to spend more hours practicing drills. We were the defending champs. I had no choice but to let my coach know that I would have to sit out on some games so that I could look for a job and do well on my midterm exams. So what you might notice here is that between some of these sentences, it seems like we've kind of lost meaning in this passage and it's jumping around. So like take the first and second sentence, for example. The first sentence, the writer's talking about getting a job to stay in school, and it seems like in the next sentence, they're jumping to all of a sudden the rugby coach wanting them to spend more hours practicing drills. So here we've lost the connection without those transitional phrases, right? How are these two sentences connected? When a reader sees this, it just looks like they're jumping around. You can also build coherence by repeating. So you repeat keywords and phrases, so you keep that main idea in the reader's mind, but you don't have to be overly redundant, right? So for example, in that first passage, she looked at him and frowned. He returned the look, then looked away at a stranger looking for his lost keys. So we have this idea of looking, but we don't need to be redundant by using the same word every single time. So there's different ways, right, to phrase this. So we could say she looked at him, he glared back, then glanced away at a stranger searching for his lost keys. And of course, we've been over pronouns. When we talked about vague pronouns before, we learned that a pronoun becomes vague if there's no antecedent or a noun that it is referring to that came before, right? So if it's unclear to the reader what noun you were referring to from before, like you don't have a clear antecedent, then the pronoun becomes vague or unclear. So in that way, pronouns actually create a natural connection right, in our writing. Because they're always going to be referring to some specific antecedent. So here, for example, the students in the summer English course were making great progress in their writing and reading skills. Soon they'll take the final exam, which they should be able to pass with flying colors. So here, the pronouns in the second sentence, they create a natural connection or link to the first sentence, right? Because the pronoun they is referring to the students. And of course, we've talked about this at length with the narrative essay, right? Maintaining a consistent point of view. So we know first person is I, second person is you, and third person is like he, she, they, right? So consistent point of view shows that shows the relationship of the writer to the essay and its content. So be careful not to shift from first to second person point of view, right? And we also talked about this too in vague pronouns. If I say, spicy food makes me feel sick, right? Therefore, you shouldn't eat it. If I switch to you, right, where did the you come from and who is the you I'm talking to, right? So maintaining that first person. If spicy food makes me sick, therefore I should avoid eating it. Okay, so here's second person you, right? And in general, it is discouraged by some instructors, right, to use it in academic writing. So I would say, like, in special cases, certain circumstances, you could be a great way, like, to talk directly to the reader, right? But just know, like, depending on who you're writing for, what field you're writing in, right? Some instructors do generally discourage it. And of course, third person, if we're observing something, we need to use third person, right? And then the L in CLUESS is language. So when we think about language, think about the usage, right? So think about the appropriateness. So what do I mean by that? So for example, you wouldn't be very informal when you come to class and you're like, "Hey, mister, how's it?" Right? You wouldn't really talk like that to me or your other instructors, right? Or in a paper saying, "This sucked," right? Or like, "I went to the mall and it sucked," right? We wouldn't really use language like that, right? So think about what's appropriate in, like, what you're writing for, right? In the context that you're writing in. So instead of saying it sucked, you could say it was disappointing. And language also refers to tone, right? So we normally describe tone using adjectives, and every writer, right, has a tone. So some of you are very humorous writers, serious writers, sentimental writers, right? So there's a tone, the specific tone you should use for, like, certain types of essays, right? So for example, in your narrative essay, maybe you use a very sentimental tone, right? Or a serious tone if you were talking about something really life-changing and serious that happened to you. But or maybe it was a humorous event that you wrote about, so you used a humorous tone. But a humorous tone wouldn't match with the informative essay, because the purpose of the informative essay is we're trying to educate and inform our reader about a certain topic. So if we were to try to be funny or sound humorous, we run the risk of the reader not really taking us seriously and what we have to say seriously. And then diction. So diction refers to word choice, right? Or finding the best word, right, for what you're trying to say, right? And especially depending on who you're talking to. So think of it this way: when you're emailing your boss, and they ask you to do something, you'll say, you'll say, "Yes, I will work on it right away." But to your friends, you might say, "Okay, you got it," right? So, the difference in the word choice that we're using here really depends who you're writing for. And think about the connotations of words too. So all words have a meaning or feeling attached to them. So I think it's great that if you guys use a thesaurus or thesaurus.com and you're looking up synonyms of words, I think it's really great to do that. But be careful of the synonyms that you do use, because the meaning might be the same, but the feeling or meaning behind the word is different. So the connotation becomes different. So, sorry, let me go back. So what do I mean by that? So for example, let's take the word unique and odd, right? They kind of share a similar meaning, but the connotation is extremely different, right? Usually when we use the word unique, we use it in a positive way, right? Like, "Oh, your writing style is so unique," right? Like, it's a good thing, right? But if we say, "Oh, your writing is so odd," right? That's more of a negative connotation. So they might share a similar meaning, but you really got to think about your word choices, right? And make sure you're using the appropriate words. And of course, we've talked about this, right, when we read Be Specific, that essay where she gave lots of examples of plants and flowers. So always be specific in your writing. That is, in general, that is the best, one of the best things you can always remind yourself to do is to be specific. It's better to be too specific than so general that, right, your writing just sounds like telling and it lacks any kind of showing, right? So general is school, right? We make it a little bit more specific college, but it would be best if we can make it more specific than that, right? And give the name of that college, so like Guam Community College. Okay, so here is something I would have done with you in class, but we'll just try it together. So general, we have food. So like what kind of specific food? Okay, let's say you want pizza, right? Let's make it more specific. What kind of pizza? Okay, maybe you say Hawaiian pizza. I don't like Hawaiian pizza. Let's do something else. Supreme pizza, right? Or television show. Television show. So maybe more specific, we can say, oh, anime. Okay, let's make it more specific. What specific type of anime? Okay, maybe we'll say Demon Slayer, right? And same thing with like a piece of writing. You might say essay. Okay, make it more specific. What kind of essay? Informative essay. So now we've made it, the most specific we can make it. The U in CLUESS stands for unity. So this means staying on track, right? Everything comes together. It's not coherence, because coherence is, remember, connection between ideas, but unity means everything comes together. You're not going off-roading somewhere, off topic, right? So you have a controlling idea, usually your thesis, okay, and everything you're writing about revolves around or supports that idea or thesis. Okay, and then the E in CLUESS stands for emphasis. So emphasis helps, right, your paper come together and make your writing more smooth because you're consistently emphasizing, right, important ideas or keywords, which also helps the reader remember what you were originally writing about and to help them stay focused. So if you read a essay before where you like lost track of what they were even talking about and you had to like kind of go back to the beginning or maybe the first paragraph to remember what were they writing about, then most likely this person wasn't using enough emphasis, right, of their main ideas to help the reader, right, because the reader will forget, right, they will forget. So, right, using emphasis can really help with that. Okay. And then support is the evidence we need, right, in our writing, and we will talk more about like evidence and explaining when we get to the argumentative essay, right? But in other words, support is like you're showing, right? And telling is you just tell your reader, but you got to show them, right? You got to show them with evidence or some kind of explanation. In your informative essay, you're showing them with, if you're doing process analysis, you're showing them with details on how to do each step, right? Or descriptions of each step. If you're doing illustration, you're showing support through examples. And of course, sentences, right? Use a variety of sentences in your writing. And I've kind of talked about this before, but having variety is great, right? And we went through the 4 sentence types. So you don't want to use all simple because then it'll sound too choppy, right? But if you use all compound complex sentences, it becomes so wordy and dense, right, to read the writing. So it's just great to just kind of have some variety in there. Okay, so here are the 4 types of sentences if you need reminding, right? Simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. Okay, and last but not least, just some like quick little rules, right? Capitalization. I gotta mention the I because I'm still seeing a lowercase I, right? And I know you all know that it's supposed to be capitalized, and but I just kind of have to remind you again. Those little things, they really matter, right? Proper nouns, we've covered capitalization, so anything that is a proper noun or has a name, right, we must capitalize it. Punctuations shouldn't be right next to each other unless you're using quotations, right? So in that first example, hey, he said, that is how we would properly put a comma next to a quotation. But in that second example, we do not need a question mark, then a period, then the quotation, then the period. We just need the question mark, then the quotation. And of course, right, always check your spelling, your whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft Word, but Microsoft Word is a lot better at this. There is a grammar and a spell check. I believe it's like if it's a red underline, it means the spelling is incorrect. If there's blue, there's something going on with grammar. Okay, so here I have this passage, and I want you to pause and just kind of read through it. Okay, hopefully you paused it and you read through it. So here in this passage, right, I would say this passage is very smooth, right? There's a lot of clues going on, right? So I want you to see if you can identify what kind of clues they're using. Are they using transitional phrases? If so, what are they? Are they using pronouns? Is their point of view consistent? Are they repeating key ideas, keywords, or phrases? So we have lots of transitional phrases here, like however, therefore, right? Um, they're repeating consistently the same ideas, right? Habits, lifestyle meaning being healthy, staying active, right? And a sentence I really want to point out is that second and third sentence. So here they say, while these factors are easy to catch up to us in life, they don't diminish the importance of being healthy and staying active, especially during a huge chapter in our lives. Our college years, as many people call it, are the best years of your life. So they're repeating an idea here, but they're not being redundant by repeating the same words. So in that first sentence, they're talking about this huge chapter in their lives, and then the same idea repeats in the next sentence, which is the huge chapter in their lives is basically their college years, right? So we have lots of natural links here in this passage from sentence to sentence, right? So I would say this is a very smooth paragraph. So after you watch this video, under this video there should be an exit ticket. Okay, I think there's about I think there's 4 questions, I believe. It's like a mini quiz. I called it an exit ticket, but it's a mini quiz. It's due by before midnight tonight. So you'll go through, and I'm gonna ask you some questions related to what we talked about here. And then if you just want to look at just the slides to review again and not the video, the slides are also available under skills and topics, okay, under Moodle.